Hello and warm, hello and a warm welcome to each one of you. My name is Utpal Bhaskar. I'm the lead for infrastructure for Mint, and we are on a virtual platform today with a very interesting group of industry experts and thought leaders for a discussion on micro logistics and last mile delivery in COVID-19, the first response and opportunities amidst challenges. Now, this webinar is powered by Livemint and Lightning Logistics. The pandemic has absolutely changed the way that the world operates. It's also been a learning experience for a lot of businesses to come up with disruptive models, given that the consumer preferences have absolutely changed. So, for example, if today there was a time when people were absolutely dependent on deliveries for everything, a kind of a consumption that has also been tapered. It also comes at a time when the India is slowly opening up, while the numbers are yet to reach the level at they were at the pre-pandemic times. But also there's not only a little bit, there's a lot of apprehension around how this entire ecosystem will also go forward. Now, there's a challenge, but I know there's also the pressures of delivery. The Amazons and the others of the world will absolutely be looking at how to cater to the consumers. But there's also an opportunity. In fact, one of the numbers which are being talked about is there's a Frost and Sullivan Urban Logistics Opportunity Study, which talks about the global logistics is expected to reach around $10.6 trillion in 2020. And of this entire kitty, transportation alone will account for around 70%. Now, technology is the key in all of this, and we have with us the set of experts who absolutely understand this space. They know what's going to come, and they are going to look at the crystal ball and tell us what is in store for us. Now, without taking any much time, given that our viewers and listeners are there to listen to the speakers, let me introduce our panelists for the day. We have with us Mr. Soinder Gill, who is the CEO of Global Business, Hero Echo, and he's also the Director General for Society of Manufacturers of Electric Vehicles. We have with us Mr. Shreyash Shibulal, who's the founder and director of Rescale. We have with us Dr. Lavish Bhandari, who's the director at Indicus Foundation. And we also have with us Mr. Hanish Yadav, who is the associate partner at McKinsey and Company. We'll start. It's not a very huge format, it's a short format. I will start with, I'll start asking this question to each of our esteemed panelists that how do you see this ecosystem evolving? I would like to come to Mr. Gill first.
Okay, thank you, Utpal. Well, to me, looking back, micro logistics existed in the blood and vein of our organization and our country. For example, if you look at a vegetable vendor, and from mandi in trucks to tempos to autos to rickshaws to hand carts to bringing the vegetable fresh at your home and yet taking care of a perishable thing like a vegetable. And by evening, selling of the whole of produce. Imagine what goes in his mind, what calculation goes in his psyche to make it happen. And he does it over and over again, very systematically and single-handedly without the technology. But now, when we expand it, obviously on the other side is Amazon or such big guys who are surviving on micro logistics is a way of bringing technology onto the blood and vein what is already in India. Because India specifically has heterogeneous vehicle population. We have cycles, we have cycle rickshaws, we have e-rigs, we have autos, we have all sorts of Vikrams and 4-seaters, 6-seaters. So there is an easy possibility of mix and match of all these things to provide the best optimum solution to any of the last mile deliveries, which is now becoming more and more relevant because of pandemic. Because earlier we all used to go and buy things. Now the things are being bought to us. At macro level it looks the same. But imagine the way our habits are growing, most of us may not even venture out quite a bit to buy things out and will depend on just systematic changes from whatever we were going on to window shopping or otherwise to malls to sit at home and relax and order and expect that within few hours or within a day the things would come to our doorsteps.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm interrupting you here, but it's a very interesting point. In fact, when you say that, it's not only about the way that things will happen, in the sense that I was just one of the hot discussions today is also about how the basic design or design architecture will change of buildings as well. How the entire when you talk about the way that different businesses will then react to it. I would like to bring in Hanish very quickly here. Give us an overview. Tell us, as in, how do you quantify these disruptions which are out there, and where are we going from here?
Hey, thanks, Utpal. I think great examples by Mr. Gill on micro logistics being always there. Uh, I think let's step back and say how has pandemic changed the logistics, right? And as McKinsey and company, when we step back and see, look, there is a big change that will happen in the consumer behavior, right? And I think we should understand fundamentally the consumer behavior is changing where people are becoming more and more dependent on things being brought to them, as Mr. Gill said, right? So more and more penetration of online purchases would happen, right? So it's the biggest push that India has seen in digital transactions or at least online transactions going on. Now, how is that impacting supply chain? In a couple of things also because of pandemic. There was another big impact that happened because of pandemic is the visibility in the supply chain really became to the fore, right? So and hence there are two big things that we are seeing. I think the two demand side, at least on the logistics side, and I'll talk about micro logistics side. The one thing, the first thing that starting to happen is where consumers of logistics services are demanding almost contactless supply chains, right? Where people are saying there was a time when people would want digital supply chains, like people would want to do this as now consumers are saying, I also want to know which people in the supply chain touched which packet, right? Because I want to trace it back to figure out if there is some pandemic. So that's a big change. That's a first opportunity for logistics players, not more so for. It has implications for last mile delivery as well, right? Every consumer would want to know which delivery boy touched which packet, and hence you can track it back. So any provider who gives that facility has an edge. I think the second
So the granularity of that information.
Yes, yeah, the granularity of that information, so you can make the supply chain more round. The second thing that we are seeing is huge demand for omni-channel, right? So a brand.com, which was is now is thinking about how to serve customers in an offline and online channel, right? When everybody starts to think that there is a huge demand which starts to come on these micro logistics because everybody needs to get delivery, and hence the hyper local play in an omni channel space. The last leg or to service an omni channel need or is the hyper local or the micro logistics. So we are seeing a lot more traction where individual brands, you could name any one of them, right? So they are thinking about setting up their own omni channel network, and there is where the hyperlocal delivery becomes important. So at least on those two needs, right, we have seen an increasing trend of people and these services becoming even more important as we go. There is a third phase, right, as Shreyas will probably say, or Mr. Gill, on why on this micro logistics, electrical vehicles, and why is that an important thing, right? Why their penetration and their adoption, and we have some views on that on the adoptability across each segment. How will that happen? But at least on those two, we are seeing a big trends on the omni-channel side and being on contactless supply chains.
So very quickly, if you would like to say that one thing that the businesses need to get absolutely that playbook in order would be what? If there would be one area that would like them to focus on right now.
Look, I think this for a logistics provider, the ability to do omni-channel needs, and it has three parts to it. Once you, for example, go to a brand and say, look, I can help you set up an omni-channel. There is the first part of it is the ability to take an order, an online order, and connect it through a store to say how will that order get fulfilled? Does it go from a store? Does it go from a DC? Does it go from a dark store? Right. So that engine, is there a firm that can fulfill that need? There is a second need to say, to go to a brand and say, look, I will help you set up the network. How many stores do you need in the city? How many dark stores do you need? How many fulfillment centers do you need? And there is a third place where people like Shreyas or even Shadowfax or other people, like now everybody has last mile delivery, where they say, look, I will become the hyper local provider. I will have delivery boys who will innovate and deliver that service for you. So
Right.
those are the three elements of being able to do it.
Right. So basically, it's a how do you evolve? How do you
Yes.
kind of face this pressure? I would like to bring Shreyash into this conversation. Shreyash, you have been involved in the logistics part of it. This is a setup that you have started. What are the pressures today? So, for example, as Anish said, that the consumers are getting very demanding. They are talking about who are the people in the entire supply chain who touched that package. What is the kind of pressures that you're now seeing in the last mile delivery?
Yeah, so that's maybe a good place to start would be the beginning of the pandemic story for Lightning Logistics and probably most other logistics players. The first couple of days were definitely filled with a lot of uncertainty. No one really knew how to sort of deal with. There was no previous data point to kind of show us what is the next step. And at the same time, there was this surge in demand. And as I think Mr. Yadav rightly pointed out, that surge in demand was also closely followed by sort of a demand for more information. And I think that traceability is exactly what Mr. Yadav was talking about. And from our perspective, we had to think quick on our feet, like many other logistics players. We had to think quick on our feet. We had to learn from our peers, and we had to develop, new SOPs to sort of mitigate the risk of, the spread of the disease. So, from our perspective, we definitely put a lot of time into thinking about how we're going to do contactless delivery, and more importantly, how are we going to make it traceable? And we put into place many measures to make sure there's a traceability.
Right. Right. So now, in fact, one of the things is about how to reskill your workforce. Now, we have been talking about the skill development mission and upskilling have been talked about for some time now. But Dr. Bhandari, this comes at a time when there are job losses happening across the economy. There are businesses which are absolutely gone fat. There are people who have been firing up their work. They have been letting go of their workforce. How do you think that in this entire context, when we talk about a workforce learning new skills so that the consumer gets assuaged, where do you think then lies the biggest challenge from the upskilling point of view?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if we step back a little on this, what's
Sure.
really been happening is that you have the unorganized sector, which has completely been annihilated in the last couple of months. And when you have that, the organized sector is actually moving in.
Mhm.
So while we talk about the employment increases in the micro logistics sector, right now, all that is happening is it is replacing some part of the unorganized sector. It's really not being able to replace a large part of it. So right now, it's essentially a change in the whole structure of the logistics business from the informal delivery channels to the formal delivery channel. Broadly, that seems to be what's happening.
Right.
Now,
Right.
what's really interesting about this is that in the formal delivery channels also, despite the fact that the training levels have been abysmal, we haven't really had that much of training or very high levels of training, which you might expect. Despite that, it has been able to move very rapidly over the space of a few weeks. So it seems to indicate that actually training is not going to be such a critical constraint in the
In the
expansion.
more work.
No problem.
Sorry, I'll just interrupt you for a second. Shreyash, we can't see you. I believe there's some kind of a lighting thing at your end. In fact, a lot of our participants are been mentioning that. Is there a lighting thing at your end? Or maybe.
I believe it's camera issue. I'm going to drop off and join back.
Oh, all right, all right. So, Mr. Bhandari, sorry I interrupted you. So, you talked about how training will not be a big problem, given that. But I would like to get Mr. Gill here. One interesting part which was talked about, Hanish, which mentioned was about the EV part of it, and you talked about how when we look at the vehicles which are on Indian roads, there's absolutely a kind of it's a maze which is out there. The EV story hasn't taken up very well actually. From a time when when we heard about one of the cabinet ministers, he said that if I remember, how does EV story get sorted? At least in this, I believe it's also an opportunity now.
Yes, surely it's an opportunity because EVs are meant really for the last mile delivery because of the efficiencies they bring in. Because today, if you see, around 85% of the electric two-wheelers are low speed or city speed two-wheelers, which means they can't go long distances, but they are very, very efficient when they are at the city speeds operating. So they're not really replacing a personal transport. They're replacing a need there, a need of either moving people or in case of logistics, moving material. So is the case of e-carts and e-rigs. They have beautifully weaved into a metro station or a bus station and onto a guy who comes to office or otherwise carts which are delivering things inside the lanes also. So I believe this is the time for electric vehicles and we are seeing the upsurge also because there is no competition here. The only competition is from IC engine side which doesn't really fit well into the micro logistics equation. EVs because of connectivity, EVs because of networking, and so much other electronics inside is able to fit very well in there.
Very quickly, Hanish, when we talk about, so there were the problems there. Now, what do the businesses do? So, I'm not even getting into, the next set of problems which are going to come. So, but initially, for example, there was a time when people were not very open to ordering online and stuff and all of that, but that demand started slowly coming in. I'm not saying it's there, but yes, and that's the reason why this N number of orders which kept on coming in from the Home Ministry, which talked about whether essential services allowed, non-essential items allowed, not allowed, and there was all kind of I think one really needed a flowchart at one point of time to understand that what was allowed and what was not allowed. So, no, I'm not. You have been a part of the government, so I'm not going to draw you on that part of the conversation. But what did the businesses do? Say, for example, I was running a logistics service. What did I do right? What did I did right so that at least my parcels started moving?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, Utpal, and I'll probably we worked right through it, right? Raw, trying to talk to some of the policymakers at that point of time. I remember when the first order came in, I was talking to some of these policymakers in the department, and they said, "Look, it is impossible to run supply chains selectively, right? To say that you will only allow trucks of essential commodities to run, it was almost impossible, right? Trucks in India carry so much mixed loads. 35% of load in India is part truck load, which is essentially by nature means that it has been aggregated, right? So how do you allow empty trucks? Because if empty trucks don't move, how will the full trucks move? So I think we got it right, but just recalling, it's an interesting question to say what businesses did well versus not. I think the first thing that businesses that actually took care of people did well, right? The first and foremost, it was a humanitarian challenge, and I think the businesses responded to say, are my workers okay? Are my drivers okay? Where are they? Can I trace it back to them? Can I take care of them? So that probably was one big theme that emerged. I think the second big theme that emerged is just this ability to manage on ground stuff was very like I was on some groups in Bombay who were trying to sort out logistics. And every state was different, right? Every state worked very differently in terms of getting passes, etc. So it required a very different approach of what you do in Delhi as a business. Won't work on what you do in Bangalore, right? So it required a very localized approach as a business to manage that. And I think the businesses that were able to set up efficient, I know it's a terminology which we use, but efficient war rooms, right? You were almost trying to track this on a day-to-day basis, right? So that was second. And I think the third element, so people, rigorous performance management, so as to say, and the third was innovation, right? So
Right.
business innovated on how to get the stuff delivered, right? So if you sit back and say, I only have a truck to deliver and I can't make it, you won't, right? People innovated and used all types of transport, all types of, incentives to make the drivers run, make them safe. So we saw a lot of innovation, people, and a lot of entrepreneurship that got applied. So that was the third.
Actually, not to sound flippant, what you're saying is that what didn't kill you made you stronger. Shresh,
Yeah.
I want to get you in on this. So, say, as Harish rightly mentioned, that it was a puzzle which kept on. There was too many moving parts there. Every state was different, and as the way that the entire conversation then emerged was about the center said that it's for the states to then evolve a strategy on their own, enforce.
Yeah.
What you as a business do, which kind
Yeah.
of yeah.
So I mean, I think like you rightly pointed out, there's so many moving parts, and ultimately, with any new extreme guideline, there'll always be a delta. In the first initial days, as to what is the guideline versus how is it enforced, and that'll always be there, and that's to be expected. But obviously. It was I mean, for example, Lightning Logistics, we operate in 3 states. Each state, we knew firsthand that each state of the guidelines were completely different. And I think what was an extra little bit of a challenge for us was that we operate our own fleet. The fleet belongs to us. Hence, we have our own maintenance team. We have our own technical team, right? So, and I think that was maybe, that was maybe something that was not necessarily accounted for initially. How do you account for a maintenance team or technicians essentially, right? How do you account for them to actually be able to come and maintain the fleet? But I think for us, guidelines obviously came in a sense. We created our own guidelines first as to how do we make our riders, how do we keep them safe.
Right.
And I think we were joined by many other players in the space in the same kind of sentiment. The first priority was always how do you keep them safe, and then how do you balance that with consumer demand, because ultimately a lot of the goods that we're delivering were essential goods, and we had to make sure that the end customer was not too drastically affected.
Right. In fact, I wanted to take a short viewer question, but before that, I wanted to ask you this, this I'll put to Dr. Bhandari primarily. Dr. Bhandari, there is a while there's this huge push towards opening of economy and things should come back to the near normal, which they were. Obviously, now we also need to define what the new normal will be. Given that there is this huge amount of, at some level, consumers are scared. Now, that fear which is being so ingrained now, how does that peter out? Because until and unless, even there, and I'm sure that Shreyash, you would be aware, given that you deal in the business, the demand is not there. People are only, whatever is getting bought today is more to do with the essentials or the staples. That is what is happening even on, say, delivery fronts as well. Perhaps I'm not talking about the big consumer boost there. But Dr. Bhandari, when do you see this fear getting out of the consumer mindset?
I'd like to go back to the previous question, and I think there is some link with that.
Mm-hmm.
This whole notion
Mm-hmm.
that the government asked, or the central government asked all states to build their own story, to do their own thing,
Mm-hmm.
uh, was actually the only thing the government could have done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think appreciating that problem is really important for businesses. The
Mm-hmm.
level of heterogeneity that is there in our country, you do not want a one size fits all solution being driven from Delhi.
Mm-hmm.
For that matter, in the case of businesses being driven from Bombay or wherever they're imported and created.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's extremely critical, and especially more so if you're looking at a hyper local economy, which is an economy which is driven by hyper local transactions.
Mm-hmm.
Is that even businesses will need to figure out how can we make it more and more decentralized. That
Mm-hmm.
obviously means data, granular data, but it also means granular data available to a manager who's down in the city or able to survive what's coming. Now,
Yep.
that's where this answer also lies to where how will this problem pan out over the next few months. You're absolutely right. There is a massive fear or a reluctance to purchase across the world. It's not just in India.
True.
Now the way it will happen is that perhaps in some city, a small city, it may not be the Delhis and the Bombays, across India, in small towns, villages, perhaps here and there. And that will eventually grow and also capture. I would in fact suspect that the top cities would become demand centers the last. I think it will
All
be
right.
the ones that.
Interesting point. Absolutely. I want to take an audience question here, and this is a question that I'm going to direct to Mr. Gill. There is Balu who is asking this question, and we had briefly touched upon EVs. Now, while EVs are very good for last mile, this is what Balu is asking, but our charging infrastructure has not really improved much. So we have seen the discoms and others have been putting up charging stations. Also, this is and the question that he's asking is why is this such a huge interest now at the time of? So he's basically asked the question is here is that why EVs in the times of COVID? As in, there are two parts to it. One, why it hasn't taken off much, and B, why only in these abnormal times.
See, for micro logistics, we talk of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, e-carts, etc. So there, the range is not really a serious problem because you don't really go more than 120 kilometers in a day for micro logistics type of an operation. And almost all EVs are equipped to do that much of a range. So, and they have portable capability, the need for bigger batteries or 300 kilometers type of a logistics over there. Coming to the second question, why during COVID? Why not otherwise?
Mm-hmm.
See, in the normal logistics operation pre-COVID, there was a huge amount of business out of aggregators. And the companies were themselves not entrenched into any solutions of last mile deliveries. They were leaving to aggregators who were getting people on board and asking them to buy a rickety old motorcycles, the cheapest possible, and start the business. So there was a saturation of vehicles and saturation of people.
All
Now,
right.
due to this COVID, that additional demand in terms of volumes has come. And second is cost and connection, cost and connectivity has really come up to 4. It is really established very well that cost per kilometer in case of EV deliveries is less than half, and it
All
can be
right.
well connected. So these two things are really the new things that have been surfacing during COVID. And
Do we see droids, rovers, and drones participating in hyperlogistics and last mile logistics in India scenario? And also, then obviously the question then comes about the regulations and what kind of regulations are there out there. If I'm not wrong, the little I understand about this is if you wanted to use a drone, you can't do it today, right? They had, I think the last set of regulations came out some time back. So, and I wanted to put this question to Hanish. So, do you see this? Are we absolutely going the? Of course, that will not be a right analogy today, but yes, are we looking at a scenario that we see drones delivering stuff to us?
Look, it's an interesting question, and look, India is a country. Just to give you a parlance, right? We will have the high speed trains in the country, and we will have the local trains also. So it's a country which needs solutions across the horizon, right? So the short answer to you, will you see, is there a need of growth? Of course, there is a need, right? Will it happen? Maybe, maybe not, right? So we have still a long way to go before it becomes a norm. And to me, having been in the government, I don't think regulations is the issue, right? You have seen all startups, right? If there is enough consumer demand, the regulations get made, right? This is the philosophy on the whole venture capital industry works on that philosophy, right? So let's solve the problem of the people. The regulations will get made. In fact, what I wanted to answer just to Mr. Gill, just to butcher the point that he made, I think the first thing that I see in logistics is, can we get EVs, right? So that probably is the first step, and then we could go to the payment. So there are 2-3 things, right, which are required. We are what we say is, from our vantage point, we are cautiously optimistic on how EV will get propagated in the industry. And there are important things, like for example, for two-wheeler guys, even in food hyper-local delivery, guys like Swiggy or Shadowfax or Amazon, understand 95% of the ownership is by the individual, right? And there the capital cost, like it has been established to say that the total cost of ownership is low, but still the capital cost of the vehicle is higher as compared to an IC vehicle, which puts a hindrance in his mind. So we need to solve for that. Right. The second thing so the ownership, how the ownership of these delivery companies, if companies like that start to own the fleet, it is much easier for them to switch to an electric vehicle, right? Rather than convincing my hundreds and thousands of drivers to switch to EV, right? So the ownership pattern is an important contributor on how will EVs switch, at least on the two-wheeler side, right? The second point, I think there are other solutions, as Mr. Gill rightly mentioned, for lunch times and this, while in e-commerce is much more pattern. So whether he will actually go for a swapping solution or will he go for a charging solution, we'll have to figure that out, right? Third, if you talk to the cargo, where there is an inherent need to get electric vehicles in, is on the last mile delivery on the cargo side, right? Which is from warehouses to retailers, or even e-commerce delivery which happens on three-wheelers largely. I think there the problem, if we solve the problem of a good product in the market, right, which is a good Indian product, just to give you nuances of how Indian logistics work, right, the last 40 meters to a warehouse will have potholes, the three-wheelers actually topple down, they are overloaded in a market. So if you get the right product, I think there the propensity to fill the market is much higher. Because people have actually extracted juice in terms of efficiency a lot, right? So people, logistics players, even consumers want to take out cost. And the only real solution now is electric vehicle, because the delivery cost of electric vehicle is 50% less, right? So there is a lot of need to adopt to an electric vehicle in the last mile logistics for three-wheelers, if there is a right product in the market, if a product which can actually cater to the load or the rigor or the sturdiness that is required in Indian conditions. If that happens, because anyways there is a lot of captive or the company's ownership, so the companies can switch. A lot of companies do.
So basically, you mean that if you have the ownership is in your hand, then you can make these decisions.
Yes.
For a lot of them, so basically it doesn't work very well in the aggregator model, right?
Yeah. So look, what happens also, and Shreyas should add here, right? He would know what starts to happen is people who are servicing, for example, the Swiggies and the Zomatos of the world, also use that vehicle for their personal needs, right? So even if you fulfill his ability to make a delivery, some parts of the time he will use his vehicle as a personal vehicle, right? I think a big switch will happen when people who do not own a vehicle currently, but still have a license, right? They can start to become delivery boys, right? When they become, and they are using a vehicle only for delivery purposes, I think the propensity for the aggregators to influence an electric vehicle is much higher.
Right. Shresh, I wanted to get you on this. He mentioned a very interesting part. Since you guys, you have your own fleet, right?
Mhm.
And an EV. So do you think and what Mr. Gill has said, and also what Hanish touched upon, does EV satisfy that particular need of yours, and how cost effective is it? And as Hanish rightly pointed out, is there a product available today to fit that, to meet that demand, or to kind of fill that gap?
Right, right. So, from our perspective, I think sort of all the pluses of EVs that were sort of talked about today, operational efficiencies, all of that is definitely true. Cost per kilometer is definitely lower. There are a few probably things that we haven't really figured out, in this country or in the world also perhaps, is what is the residual value of these vehicles after you've ridden it for a certain number of kilometers. The finance, and that hence sort of that leads into the financing question. Are financial institutions such as banks, are they prepared to offer at par financing? If you because from what I understand currently the interest rates are slightly higher for EVs as opposed to an internal combustion vehicle. So that whole issue is something that we definitely need to figure out. Um, and I think Mr. Yadav also touched upon an interesting point, which was it's not just about does it fulfill our use case, because in the aggregator model, the rider themselves, they go out and they use the vehicle for their own personal use as well, right? Because typically what happens is they finance their own internal combustion vehicle, they've used it for deliveries and their personal use. And I think that to some degree it comes down to awareness. I think at least from the feedback that we've gotten from our delivery executives, they've sort of they most of them, I would say, enjoy using the vehicles. In fact, we even allow some of them to use it for their personal usage, even though the vehicle belongs to us. And they even go to the extent where they have preferences of one vehicle over the other. But I think one of the things that Mr. Yadav also said is a purpose built vehicle for last mile logistics in particular that addresses that particular use case. I would say there are definitely vehicles in the market that addresses that need, but maybe not as many as there should be, right? As that space is not very, it's definitely not flooded. It's not flooded by any means right now, and that's actually something that we are trying to address. Actually, I think one of the one of the participants actually asked this question, which was, does Lightning Logistics are we also looking at developing our own EV form factor? The answer to that is Lightning Logistics is one of our business verticals, but we're also looking at developing our own EV form factor for a last mile logistics vehicle.
All right. So now, in fact, listening to all of you, there's one thing because at Mint we have been covering these stories about how economy is trying to rev up, or the kind of losses we have been seeing across, the kind of what's happening to the migrant labor as well and others. In fact, but in our conversations, what I've realized is perhaps in all this doom and gloom scenario, this is one space which is actually seeing a kind of employment potential. And Dr. Bhandari, would you agree to it? Because given that if there is such a kind of a demand as the gentlemen have been talking about, is this going to offer some kind of at least relief to our workers?
So, as I'd already said in my first remark, right now the logistics sector is the organized part of it is just filling in the gap which was left by the informal sector. So, in an aggregate sense, it's not really filling. It's not really yielding that much more. at the current point. Okay? What will happen as we go along is, and then the hope is that this sector expands enough to then be able to do much more. The size of the economy increases much more. So perhaps in 2, 3, 4 years, that's when the real boom will happen in this sector. Right now, we're just laying the basic framework for it. Right?
Right.
But even then, when you have a situation where there is darkness everywhere, and you have a small candle which is lit, then yes, it's great to see at least some positive examples happening there. But I think the more interesting part of this whole thing is how this new economy is going to be integrated with the e-vehicle market, and the fact that the organized sector is having to completely overhaul its B2C model. And actually it depends upon how they do that. And I'll again take back from the point I made before. Given the heterogeneity of some of our habitations, localities, neighborhoods, villages, even for corporate sector, a one-size-fits-all logistics model just cannot work, and that will require a very high level of decentralization. When I talk to with some of my colleagues, I am not seeing that. Right now, the corporate sector is very centralized, and if it remains like that, none of this will pan out.
Right.
It will have to decentralize, otherwise it will not be able to exploit all the opportunities that are going to come our way over the next few years.
Absolutely. Mr. Gill, one of the things which has been, which we have in our reportage at Mint have realized is that there is a lot of this rural demand which was talked about at the announcement of a normal monsoon. Now there are all kind of question marks over there. And I want you to don your hat as someone who represents the manufacturers. And there's a huge push for rural electrification which has been happening in this country. So we have seen all these schemes which have been rolled out where there has been say connection being given out, and then there's been adjusted against the future bills and stuff and all of that. What kind of demand you are seeing from rural India? And does this monsoon kind of play around, as in kind of give it a certain amount of rev it up somewhere?
The rural penetration is the limitation of the corporates. Why? Because it's a new technology. You have to take the vehicles far into deep entrenched areas, and then you have to service them. Even if the maintenance is minuscule, but it's electronics. So, like my 400 dealers haven't even entered more than 50 villages yet.
Why is it so?
So because if I do that, I'll be needing so much of disproportionate resources or a small business to take care of a setup of one small breakdown, because we are so careful about the after-sales service. It will need a huge paraphernalia right now. So I think it's a normal progression from cities A, B, C into rural. But yes, demand is really there. Demand exists. And now we are tying up with one or two organizations which have the might and franchisee might to take it all the way down. And they have the strength also of people who can be technically trained. So new business models, like Doctor is saying, have decentralized type of operations are the way out. And if that is a success, perhaps rural penetration will be far better than the urban.
Harish, I wanted to get you in on this conversation, this particular bit that Dr. Gill and Mr. Gill and Dr. Bhandari spoke about. We have been hearing from the government a lot about how EVs are the next frontier and will be achieving it anytime soon. Also, kind of gels very well with our clean energy commitments that we have made, and also it comes at a time when, say, the big boys of the space have opted out, say, a US. From the policy perspective, we have seen a FAME 1, we have seen a FAME 2. Do you think there's something that kind of can be built for the rural to kind of tap into the rural demand that Mr. Gill has been talking about? Do you think there's something that can be done there?
No, look, I think it's a fair point, but you look at how EV penetration has happened across the world, right? So, EV penetration, I think the first and foremost opportunity is and will be in concentrated demand clusters. where you can solve for infrastructure creation pretty rapidly, right? Charging infra, other things, right? So I would say that the policy should first facilitate that, right?
All right.
Because even our view when we run some of these numbers, right? EV penetration in US is less than 10%, right? Maybe less, right? Uh, Even in other countries, right? Even in countries like Scandinavia, they've not as a proportion of the total vehicle park, those numbers are still thing. So I think there is a lot of policy enablement that has to happen. What I call the low-lying fruits, right? At least there we should encourage the penetration because, for example, two-wheelers, right? Definitely, that is the segment that will get electrified the fastest.
All right. Okay.
Options on battery swapping, which actually gets the capital, which get the first time cost equivalent to a.
Mm-hmm. I would like to get Mr. Bhandari in. Dr. Bhandari, am I audible to you?
The penetration. I think.
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, sorry, I think, yeah. So, Dr. Bhandari, I wanted to ask you this. When we look at, as you said, that it's not like one size fits all, and also we should appreciate the fact that the government, the federal government, the union government, when it took the decision that, okay, states need to get this, their own stories here, and to kind of build the strategies around it, that was the best thing that could have been done. Now, also coming at a time when we've been talking about this 20 trillion stimulus which is there, do you think that a certain part of this could, and obviously the industry will keep on demanding and demanding and demanding, and there have been a specific set of demands on the part of the EV manufacturers as well. Do you think a certain part of it could have been or still can be used towards kind of providing an impetus to this ecosystem?
First of all, the 20 trillion number is more of a liquidity, filling in a liquidity. It's not a boost. And I think the government has spoken in different voices, but I think generally there is agreement, even at least within the government, that this is not needed. I'm actually expecting a boost in the government. Perhaps not now, perhaps in a few months. And it will, I mean, because you do need to push up demand. And that will need to happen. It doesn't happen now, that's fine. It could happen in a few weeks or a month from now, but that will come up. Would it be aimed at this particular sector? I actually doubt it. I think it will be more of a generic boost aimed at pushing generic demand. And in that sense, this sector will anyway gain from it.
Right.
I'm not even sure I would ever demand a very sector-specific boost at this point in time because we want to maximize demand overall, and this sector would benefit the most from that. It's not that so you don't really need to direct it at the micro logistics.
Sector specific, absolutely. We'll take a couple of viewer questions now. Now we have a question from Zinnia, and I think I'll. The question is, how do electric vehicles stack up on maintenance costs versus CNG powered vehicles? What about safety? I think, Mr. Gill, this is absolutely up your alley.
Yeah, the mere fact that there are hardly any moving parts and hardly any wear and tear parts in an electric vehicle. Even the electric motor that runs on a bearing, and there are no clutch, no rings, no gears, no transmissions, etc. in the most of the vehicles, is obviously a fundamental to a maintenance of mechanical type. So what can go wrong in an electric vehicle is electronics rather than a mechanical, which is a normal wear and tear like tires, tubes, brakes, etc. So from that point of view, it is well established because it is in the way we are gazing in the future where electric vehicles may have life much longer than the counterpart of fossil fuel vehicles. So in the end, the demand of electric, because of the overall demand may even come down. But yes, very, very surely, the maintenance of electric vehicle is left to more of nuts and bolts tightening and battery being bulged or not bulged, electronics malfunctioning, not really about the overhauling of engines or service with oil and dust filters and filters, etc.
Right, right. There's another question. Uh, uh, this is a question from Partha, and I think this is Shresh coming to you. That rural India is the market for the future. How it is being currently addressed, to which we briefly touched upon the topic earlier. But this question for you, Shresh, that and this is from Partha, who says that rural India is the market for the future, and how is it being currently addressed? You operate in 3 states. What are your plans on the rural sectors, at least there?
We currently only operate in urban, highly concentrated population concentrated kind of areas. We operate in Chennai, Hyderabad, and Bangalore. To be it's quite frankly, it's been on the agenda for some time that we should because I think some of these things, learning how to operate in a tier 2 or tier 3 city, or maybe even more rural areas, you have to build up that experience. You have to experiment, right? Right now, we don't we don't have that experience, but that's definitely something that in the future that we'd want to experiment with, because I think ultimately part of the viewer would it is a large uncaptured market right now when it comes to micro logistics.
All right. Now this is a question. I think this is one of the last questions. Now we are absolutely running out of time. This is a question to Hanish. Are electric vehicles a good solution only for the last mile? But given, and as Mr. Gill mentioned earlier, there is no question of range anxiety in last mile, in the sense that you don't have to go to long distances. But what about, say, a middle mile as well, a middle mile logistics? When does, and maybe Shresh would like to weigh in there as well after Hanish.
As I said, right, we should focus and get to the low-lying fruits as well, right? I think the adoptability increases in the last mile segment. For example, some of the segments which are more suited for these type of delivery, if you get the right product in 3-wheelers, for example, that segment is dying to reduce logistics costs, right? So they will lap it up, right? On the 2-wheeler sides, if some of the fundamental ways that the industry is organized, right? If the ownership pattern changes, if you get a lot of leasing companies in play, right? So that the ownership is not with an aggregator like Swiggy, and it's not with individual people, but another third-party logistics company. I think there is where the first penetration will happen. I think on the middle mile, as I said, the fundamental reasons why they make us excited, at least on logistics segment, is their ability to bring down costs. So if that solution can be solved, or if that solution can be provided, I think the game is on, right? So the challenge is on the other side.
Right.
Right. So.
Right. Shresh, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with Mr. Yadav. I think ultimately it comes down, it boils down to a technology problem or a product offering problem, really. If there is, to be honest, I'm not currently aware. There may be something out there already that could address the middle mile kind of issue, but the middle mile, electrifying of middle mile, agenda, but. I think right now, definitely the low-hanging fruit is last mile logistics and how we can actually electrify that.
Right, Shresh. In fact, from whatever I've been able to surmise, it's a very interesting stuff which is happening out there. Also comes at a time when there are all kind of concerns, which are genuine as well, about how this entire ecosystem will evolve. Obviously, there is a question about when the demand will finally pick up, or even we'll get back to the pre-pandemic level. But from whatever I have heard from Dr. Bhandari, Shresh, Mr. Gill, and Hanish, this looks like a opportunity. And as Dr. Bhandari rightly summed it up, in the sense that if there's a lot of darkness out there, this is perhaps the only candle which is there, which gives a certain amount of apart from light, it also gives a certain amount of hope as well. Hope is the only word which I added to your summation, Dr. Bhandari. So it has been a very interesting and conversation, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the guest speakers for sharing their opinion. I would also like to thank the viewers that who took out time to be a part of this conversation. And in fact, there have been a lot of questions, but given the paucity of time, I've not been able to pose it to each and every one of you. And but absolutely, from what my key takeaways here would be that it's an opportunity going forward, obviously, but there's a lot of there's a lot of pitfalls if businesses do not look at it now. Also, do not calibrate the strategy in a way that they can then leverage it, because while it might look at an opportunity to a lot of people, it also brings with it a certain forbidding that it might not work out the way it is being so envisaged. I would like to end this session by thanking our panelists for viewers for taking out time for this discussion. Gentlemen, thanks a lot and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.